So we humbly request
with
his...
the prior permission of the Lordship, the recording has been started and it's live on YouTube.
A very, very good morning. It's time that we listen to some of the critical aspects in the CIRP process from none other than our own very judicial member, a very, very own honorable, revered Shri Judicial Member of the NCLT bar, of the NCLT bench. And we are very honored that he has given his precious time to us today. I know the kind of schedule that he runs. He runs helter-skelter with not only the Kolkata bench, but bench 1 and 2 both. And he's also having to man the Cuttack bench. Both of these benches, for all the reasons that we know, is quite burdensome. I know I've used the word burdensome. I shouldn't have probably used that word, because my lords have always considered that this is a temple of justice, and whatever they are, both his lordships are doing is, of course, out of doing justice to this temple of justice. So what we know from everyday basis in appearing before his courts, he has never considered the court to be a burden. He has always mentioned to all of us who appear justice from him that feel free to argue a matter. What will come out of it is secondary, but what you should aspire and desire to do is to bring the right things on the table. He is the one person whom I think across the country, we have seen this, that his courts are full up to its brim. He is not only a person who gives justice, but he also makes sure that the juniors gets chance to talk, and he makes sure that he reads his judgment, the substantive portions of his judgment. I seldom not find it in every court, but when I find that he is doing it, I then understand that he's doing it with a sense of even educating the people around, that what is it that can happen when such a kind of an application or petition is served. So he makes sure that this bench is not only delivering justice, but also making sure that for all times to come, at least for the near future, people learn out of his deliberations. So that has been his demeanor. And we, from all the organizations that have joined in, we can't shower our blessings. We are not in that position to do. But definitely, as honest citizens, we must say that we are extremely pleased that we have a bench of this stature. So thank you, Rajshekhar sir, for joining us here. And we all of us put together, thank you for your time. I must say to each one of us that it is your presence that has made this program what it is today. And I'm not thanking each one of you separately, but honestly, thanks a ton for joining in today. It's a very, very special day, but that special day, I'll leave it to Shri S.M. Gupta ji to mention. But let me quickly say that today we are joined in not only by the NCLT Kolkata Bar Association, we are also joined in by the esteemed and few revered organizations of Calcutta, that is Association of Corporate Advisors and Executives, PBD Bar Professional Study Circle Association, Central Kolkata Chartered Accountants Association, Direct Tax Professionals Association, and of course the IBC Laws. So IBC Laws has also been doing very well in this area. I don't think I should take much time. Let me straight away hand over the baton to Shri S.M. Gupta ji, who would introduce the theme. And today being the Guru Purnima, I think we all of us also express our gratitude to Shri S.M. Gupta ji. S.M. Gupta ji, over to you.
Thank you, Mamta. Thank you, Mamta. In front of my lordship, please don't call me Guru, because I may be Guru to others, but my Lord is our Guru.
I learn from each of you every day.
In knowledge, and also in wisdom. So from my side, I convey my pranam to all my gurus who are senior to me. It's a Guru Purnima, very auspicious day. And I, on behalf of the NCLT Kolkata Bar Association, as well as on behalf of all the associations who are joining today, and their on behalf of all the associations who have joined, I welcome my Lord Justice Rajasekhar Saab and all the participants. We have more than 100 participants as Mamta just now said, this is the magic of my Lord. Wherever he goes, this lot many people will go to hear him. So I welcome my Lord, and I also welcome all the presidents and all the secretaries of our joining organizations, because to me today they are me also they are guests. They have joined with us. We are grateful to them for extending their cooperation and help. We are 6 organizations today together to welcome my Lord. And Mamta, so far as the burden you have given me for the introduction of the theme is very clear. Critical aspect of resolution process and liquidation process. In the notice, this liquidation process was not mentioned, but originally your idea was that CIRP plus liquidation process both will be covered by His Lordship, so that we all can know that what are the things we should do and what are things we should not do, and what are the procedures, what are the legal formalities under IBBI rules and laws, under NCLT rules and laws, and in the civil procedure code also there are certain things which we have to learn before going to the court. So I will not take much of the time. Today is Saturday morning, and I welcome once again my Lord Justice Rajasekhar Saab, and we are grateful to him for coming. And I also welcome all of you who have attended. Thank you very much. Mamta, back to you.
Thank you so much. I also welcome Chandyok ji. He's joined in from Delhi. Sir, welcome. I may now request Shri R.K. Vyas ji to please open this ceremony, if I may say so, with his Saraswati Vandana. And then we will move on from there. Vyas ji,
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good morning to all. Before we start our today's deliberations, we today are very auspicious day of Guru Purnima, and we call Lord Shiva the Jagat Guru, and we have got the Justice Sekhara here, the Lord Shiva in this form. With these, I have a Saraswati Vandana, Ya Kunden Tutusarahar Dhavala, Ya Subravastrabrata, Ya Veena Varadanda Manditkara, Ya Sveta Patmasana, Ya Brahma Chita Sankara Pravita Viradevai Sada Vandita, Savam Patu Saraswati, Bhagavati Nissesa Jadyapaha, Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Sri Guruve Namah. We have got the Sadanand Swarupa of the 6 organization. The first son of Lord Shiva, the Kartikeya, the Murugan, the Venu, the Subramanyam in South we know. So we got all the 6 organizations, the NCLT Calcutta Bar Association, ACE, BBD, Central Kolkata, DTP and IBC. So I called it a sort of blessings of the Lord Shiva on Guru Purnima Day. We have got the Justice Sekhara here on to deliberate on the critical issues of the resolution process in IBC laws. And with all my pranam to my seniors and the love and affection to all my compatriots on this very auspicious day of the Saturday morning, on the much more Jnana Satra we will have on the critical issues of resolution process. With these words, now I hand over the proceeding to Mamta.
Thank you, Vyas ji. That was Mr. Vyas. He is the president of the BBD BAG Professional Study Circle Association. Now I move on to Association of Corporate Advisors and Executives, and I request the president, Shri Anup Kumar Sanghai, to speak a few words about the association. Rajsekhar sir would be very happy today because I think someone has exactly pronounced his name too very well. Thank you. Anup sir.
Yeah, good morning to all, and thank you Mamta ji for this excellent opportunity. Good morning to all, and I seek blessings of all the gurus who has been present here, and welcome our Justice Lordship V.K. Rajasekhar sir at this platform where the 6 organizations has jointly joined for this particular webinar. I just briefly introduce about the ACAE. What exactly is the ACAE? Normally, it is called ACAI, Association of Corporate Advisors and Executives. It is the oldest professional body in the eastern part of the country and was established during the year 1960. Our members have a diverse profile and include professional practitioners, which includes corporate executives, industrialists, businessmen, the chartered accountants, secretaries, advocates, and CMA. And our membership strength is little more than 1,300. The area of excellence of our members is accounting, taxation, legal and corporate matters, and of course, finance, and recently introduced IBC law since last couple of years. ACAE ACAI is organizing conferences, symposia, seminars, workshops, GDs, lecture meetings, memorial lectures. And our past presidents includes late Sukumar Bhattacharya sir, late Sri N.K. Podarji, late Sri M.C. Bhandari ji. As far as industrial entrepreneurs are concerned, we have Imami Group Chairman, Mr. R.S. Agarwal and R.S. Goenka are our patron members. In the recent past, former President of India, Bharat Ratna, Pranab Mukherjee has also visited our platform and has blessed with his sayings. Our programs are addressed so far by late Jayaprakash Narayan, the political visionary, late Sri Somnath Chatterjee, statesman, former Speaker of Lok Sabha, Sri Kesrinath Tripathi, the former Governor of West Bengal, Dr. Amit Mitra, Dr. Sambit Patra, Sri Sachin Pilot, Mr. B.K. Birla, Y.C. Deveswar, Mr. B.M. Khaitan, Harshvardhan Nevatia, T.V. Mohandas Pai, and of course, our own Deloitte past chairman, Mr. P.R. Ramesh, was also our past president. This is just a brief background of ACA. We used to organize a lot of seminars, refresher courses, workshops. Group discussions are our USP, where we nurture young talents to come forward. This is all about ACA. Thank you very much, Mamta ji, for this wonderful opportunity where we have learned Lordship V.K. Rajsekhar sir. So over to you, Mamta ji.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anup ji. That was a very illustrious description. May I now request Rajesh Kakaria ji, who is the president of Central Kolkata Chartered Accountants Association. I must say a big thank you to all of your good selves to really join in this occasion. Rajesh, over to you.
Thank you, Mamta ji. A very good morning and pranam to everybody on this auspicious Guru Purnima day. I, Rajesh Kakaria, president of Central Kolkata Chartered Accountants Association, on behalf of our association, along with 5 other prominent professional associations of Kolkata, welcome Justice Rajsekhar sir and all of you present here in today's webinar on the critical aspects of resolution process. Central Kolkata Chartered Accountants Association was formed way back in 2002, and now we have stepped in 20th year, having 500 plus members. The secretary of our association is C.A. Hariram Agarwal, and he is also the present treasurer of EIRC ICI. He is one of the founder member of our association and working shoulder to shoulder for the association. As you all know, we regularly organize seminars and lecture meetings, and during this COVID time, since last 16 months, we are organizing such much more programs in virtual mode. In fact, COVID has one way boon for all the professional association to bring all India best speakers and effectively use the time to upgrade and enhance our knowledge to greater height. To celebrate this 20th year of our association, we have taken the project to have our own office space, and to raise funds for the same, we have started taking patron members. Already around 50 professionals have joined as patron in our association, and many more are in pipeline. I request all the professionals present here in this August gathering to become our patron for this noble work. Today, our speaker is none other than Honorable Member Judicial, NCLT, Kolkata branch, Justice Rajsekhar sir. I am sure all present here would be greatly benefited by the Honorable Member's derivation. Thank you, Mamta ji, for giving this opportunity. And now I'm handing over to Mamta ji. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your kind presence. May I now request Dayashankar Agarwal, who's the Vice President of DTPA, that is the Direct Tax Professionals Association, to say a few words. Rajsekhar sir, I must say that I really didn't have to do much effort to bring all of them together, because when I mentioned that your Lordship has kindly consented to give his precious time, it was they who actually approached me that it will be a pleasure if this pearls of wisdom gets distributed more and more. And that's how we are all tied up in the same knot. So may I request Dayashankar ji to come on screen?
Dayashankar ji need to be unmuted.
Oh,
Tarun, could you please make him co-host?
Sorry, I'm not able to even see him. Where is he?
No, I could see him. Tarun, could you please make him co-host?
Yes, I've seen him now. I'll do that. Dayashankar ji has done it. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Mamta ji. And good morning to everyone. I, on behalf of our association, popularly known as DTPA, welcome His Lordship Sri Rajsekhar sir in this interactive session on the critical aspect of resolution process. I feel great pleasure in introducing our association as one of the premier professional associations in Kolkata, having more than 1,700 members comprising of chartered accountants, advocates, company secretaries, cost accountants, and tax practitioners. Our association provides a forum of education, sharing of ideals and knowledge pool, sharpening skill, and networking opportunities amongst professionals. DTPA was established in the year 1982 and has stepped into the 39th years of its existence with the motto, Gyanam Ekyam Cha Nyartham, which means knowledge and togetherness for justice. We regularly organize lectures, meetings, and workshops, apart from full-day conference and annual conference on topics of professional importance, and makes a regular representation to various regulatory authorities, different departments, ministries of Government of India and Government of West Bengal on various issues pertaining to trade, industries, and profession. With this brief introduction, I welcome Dr. Rajsekhar sir once again, and welcome all the participants in today's session, and wish them a happy learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Agarwalji. I straight away now move to Sanjeev Sanghi. But before that, I must say that I welcome Mr. Rajkumar Adukia ji, who's also joined in from Mumbai, a past Central Council member of the CA Institute. I welcome all the conveners, co-conveners of these study circles. Gopal Khaitan is also there, PD Roongta, Mr. Hariram Agarwal ji, so many of them. Please pardon me, I'm not able to take all names. The Mr. President N.K. Goyal ji from DTPA in his absentia. So welcome all of you. Sanjeev, when saw that sir is coming, he categorically called me and said that, Mamta, please give me the opportunity to introduce this heavenly person. I said, oh, okay. I was quite intrigued to hear that word, that shower, if I may say, coming from him. And then he said he's one person whom I've seen to be so down to earth, being in such a high position. So I said, wow, I asked him, you don't appear in court so much. So Sanjeev, how is it that you say this? He said, no, I know him because I've been, observing him. I said, okay. Sometimes Rajsekhar is also being observed. I don't know by how many, but that is how he has a fan following in the city. So Rajsekhar sir, Sanjeev Sanghi is a follower of yours. And today I think we are more than 240 participants following you, and so many more in the live YouTube. So Sanjeev, he has sent a pen sketch. Sometimes when Rajsekhar sir speaks or writes, we actually tend to sit with a dictionary. So when he sent me a pen sketch, I actually thought what it is all about. I looked up Google and I understood what is pen sketch. So I'm sure you may have done the same thing, but there you are. You may kindly read his profile the way you like to.
Thank you so much, Mamta, for this wonderful introduction. Just to cut a story short, I had an opportunity to visit him in his office. That was a great opportunity where I learned about his vision, about the way he can do things faster. A very good morning to all of you and to all my gurus of the profession. Happy Guru Purnima. I have a great opportunity to introduce our Lordship Rajsekhar VK sir. He's the youngest ever member in the NCLT, having been appointed when he had just crossed 50 years, the minimum age for appointment. Government Victoria College, Palakkad, and obtained his law degree from Delhi University. He practiced in the field of company law, civil law, and economic offences in various courts in Chennai and Mofussil courts. After NCLT was set up, he practiced before the NCLT in the field of company law and IBC. He has practiced and advised extensively on company law and property law matters, offered end-to-end solutions for corporate restructuring, including reduction of capital, operation and mismanagement, and other company law issues and drafted contracts and agreement of all kinds. Prior to enrollment, was in central government service as an officer of the Central Secretariat Service in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. He also stood first in the enforcement officers account officer examinations for Employees Provident Fund organization conducted by UPSC in 1999. Sir is also a technology buff. He was among the first 100% who qualified the Microsoft certification examination in Windows 95 operating system when it was first launched, and still retains interest in programming. He has also used his programming knowledge to good effect in standardizing routine orders required to be passed. Sir has interest in wide range of subjects ranging from astronomy to computers to poetry. He is a polyglot, fluent in 5 languages, Malayalam, Tamil, and Kannada, besides Hindi and English. Thank you so much, Mamta ji, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Sajid. Please have some water. Thank you. So when I was reading his profile, I was thinking that Sir would include Bengali, but I don't know, he wants to be more proficient before he includes Bengali. So, with these words, I think it's now time that we must also thank IBC laws for really being the way it is. It's created a lot of ripples, if I may say so, in the arena of IBC. Why I said ripples is it was the first one. It has the first mover advantage. It was the first one to really come up with this vertical of particularly dealing with IBC laws. And of late, we have seen that the kind of updations they do is quite on a daily basis, and it's very, very helpful. So Onkar-ji, I know you're present, but you don't like to be in camera, so I'm not calling you here on camera, but thank you for all your support. Sir, it's actually now your play field, which has always been your play field though. Resolution professionals are the officers of the court, and we are very well aware of our duties, rights, responsibilities. And we also understand that duties and responsibilities come first, the rights and other things come secondary. But there are very many issues which we would like to discuss with you candidly, but not now. First is a time we would like to hear from your lordship's mouth, your concerns, something which you may like to say good about us, because that also motivates us to do better. But I just would like to say that we don't know whether we would like to change the narrative when the entire country is talking about Mr. Bezos, is talking about the SSC examinations, the Mumbai flood, or maybe the Pegasus virus. There are so many things that goes around, and the narrative keeps on changing from day to day. We have the Tokyo Olympics now, and we also see that even in Tokyo Olympics, or for example, in any T20 or even for test matches, we read that in the home turf, even for the best of the teams, it becomes difficult to play, because it is said home turf, oh my God. So as insolvency professionals, imagine our plight. We get into the home of the promoters. We tell them to set aside their entire powers. And then we also do transaction audit. We put them on all the barometers available. We also expect all the cooperation from them. We have sustainable and sustained timelines, pressing timelines. And then we have this 330 timeline. Everything falls on our head. But we, as an officer of the court, make sure that we play the role of an honest citizen, not only to your lordships, but also to the country. My lords have always been very kind enough to understand the shoe that we wear in and the perspective that we come from. But at times, it's really very intriguing to handle such situations. And my lords may be kind enough to throw some of his perspectives, because quite a number of times I see my lords to be quite perturbed and disturbed in the courts, because my lords feels that frivolous litigations are happening sometimes. So there were few things that was coming on the table, that why my lords is not trying to use mediation, or why my lords is not imposing fines and penalties on those frivolous petitions, applications, because that just eats up the time. And if there is a calm period which has been laid out in the law, why is it that during CIRP, all those calmness are set aside and everything falls on the heads and shoulders of the RP? And he has to conduct everything. He becomes the focal point, though it is known as a creditor in possession, but it is more so that it is RP who is functioning from the front. So, my lords, we leave the entire floor to you for your kind deliberations, and I'm sure we'll take back a lot of learnings which will also help my lords to conduct the courts in a better manner. Over to you, sir.
Am I audible? Mr. S.M. Gupta ji, President, NCLT Kolkata Bar Association. Ms. Mamta Binani, Vice President, NCLT Kolkata Bar Association. Mr. Rajendra Vyas, President of the BBD Bagh Professional Study Circle Association. Mr. Anup K. Sanghai, President, Association of Corporate Advisors and Executives. Mr. Rajesh Kankaria, President of the Central Kolkata Chartered Accountants Association. Mr. Dayal Shankar Agarwal, Direct Taxes Professional Association. Mr. Omkar, representing IBC Laws, Secretaries of these esteemed professional organizations, esteemed senior and learned members of various professions. My pranams to all of you. Most of you have, in terms of age, also you're elder. In terms of the experience that you bring to the table, also you're elder. And I have learned from each one of you in some way or the other, and therefore you're all my gurus in some way. Therefore, on the occasion of Guru Purnima, please accept my humble pranams. I have learned from each one of you. At the outset, let me thank you all for the very kind words that you have spoken about me. I sincerely do believe that I do not deserve much of what has been said. But having said that, I shall strive very hard to justify whatever confidence you have reposed in me. As far as today's topic is concerned, I did not really feel that we can do justice to both resolution and liquidation in the course of one seminar or an interactive session, because it will just be skimming the topic, leaving much to be desired. Therefore, I decided to focus on resolution. I requested Mamta Binani ji, who very kindly consented and dropped liquidation from today's interactive session. I only hope that critical aspects of the resolution process does not become too critical of the resolution professionals themselves. It shall be my endeavor that it doesn't go to that extent, but let us see. I want to address you primarily on 3 or 4 aspects. The first of which is also the most crucial, which is the timelines involved. Second is on the avoidable transactions. The third and its subtopics would be on the resolution plan, its preparation, and its being piloted through the adjudicating authority. What are the issues we face as adjudicating authority? Now, all of you in your professional capacities, when you interact with one another, would tend to see things from the perspective of either the resolution professional or of the corporate debtor or of the resolution applicant or indeed of the promoters in some way or the other. You may be appraised of what you're all feeling. But when it comes to the adjudicating authority, we have to see things as a whole. We can't look at it in isolated watertight compartments. We have to look at where it ends, where it is really proceeding. And we also have to keep in mind that ultimately the adjudicating authority's focus is on the corporate debtor and not on the individual components that make up this process. The first aspect on the timelines is, and all of this, most of what I'm speaking today is based out of my experience while sitting on the bench. On timelines, we have numerous applications being filed for exclusion or extension of time. This long line of cases starting from Surendra Trading Company decided that the timelines prescribed were not really mandatory and that they were, in a sense, directory. But what one misses out is that it was held to be directory as far as the adjudicating authority is concerned, and not for every single process under the CARP regulations. To my knowledge, there is no ruling that the timelines prescribed for the duties of the resolution professional are all directory and that they can take their own sweet time in dealing with various duties that they are supposed to perform. The discretion is not in any case vested in the resolution professional. It is in the adjudicating authority that this discretion is vested, and they are to be exercised for sufficient reasons. Actually, we are supposed to justify why this is required. But we see applications being filed as a matter of routine. Please exclude this period from the CARP process. Sometimes we don't even know why. There'll be a perfunctory one-liner as to the exclusion reason, which we don't really find convincing, but we sometimes do grant these exclusions and extensions only because ultimately the aim is resolution. But as I keep saying in the court also, resolution by itself is not the goal of the IBC. It is resolution within a specific time frame. And they are like two wheels of a chariot. You can't exclude or stress on one aspect to the exclusion of the other. Both of these have to go together for a successful resolution. Because otherwise, if I have a piece of land which I cannot sell in, say, 330 days, it may get sold in 20 years, but that was never the idea. The idea was to arrive at a resolution within a specific time frame. If you can't, liquidation should result so that you free up resources. Those resources which are still salvageable, in a sense, can be made available to others who may be in a position to better utilize those resources rather than let it go waste. That was the idea. But time and again, we see resolution professionals come up to us and say, so please, resolution is the aim. Full stop. But that is not the case. Resolution is not the aim. Resolution within a specific time frame is the aim. Now, if you see the usual judgment that is quoted to us is Committee of Creditors of Essar Steel versus Satish Kumar Gupta, where they said, no, you have the power to extend. But they did not say so. They did not say you extend it at the drop of a hat. Extend it just like that as a routine exercise. Keep extending it. They didn't say that. If you quote from this paragraph, that is at 127 of the SEC version, I have it written down here. It says, ordinarily the time taken in the CARP must be completed within the time limit of 330 days from the insolvency commencement date, including the time in litigation process. This aspect, I am very sorry to note here, has never been stressed. That ordinarily the time taken in CARP must be completed within the time limit of 330 days. It is not stressed at all. But the other portion in the same paragraph, the sentence that starts with, however, in a few cases where it can be shown to the adjudicating authority or appellate tribunal under the code that only a short time is left in completion of the corporate insolvency resolution process beyond 330 days. And it would be in the interest of all stakeholders that the corporate debtor be put back on its feet instead of being sent into liquidation, and that the time taken in legal proceedings is largely due to factors owing to which the fault cannot be ascribed to the litigants before the adjudicating authority, the delay or a large part thereof being attributable to the tardy process of the adjudicating authority itself. It may be open to the adjudicating authority to extend the time beyond 330 days. Now, it is nobody's case that in most of the cases it is done within this specified period. In most of the cases, routinely adjournments are being granted. Routinely extensions are being granted. Whether it is the fault of the adjudicating authority or the resolution professionals or the COC, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, the object of the legislation is not fulfilled when you don't complete the process within 330 days. Now, what part of the blame can be ascribed to the adjudicating authority or to the resolution professionals is a different thing altogether. That is something that must await an internal retrospect, so to speak, introspection, so to speak. But ordinarily, every effort must be taken to complete the CARP within the time limit of 330 days. But this aspect is completely lost. What is done now? Please extend. Why? Because the alternative is liquidation. Is it only the adjudicating authority's duty to hold the baby? We get the bulk of the bad press when the time frames get extended. They say the adjudicating authority keeps extending the time limits. No justifiable reasons are there. But still, we do it because the interest of the corporate debtor has to be kept at heart. If there is a way in which we can probably achieve resolution over liquidation, that is preferred. At the last minute, we get resolution plans. When an application for liquidation is about to be filed, or when we say this is the last time we'll extend it, at that point of time, somebody comes up and says, please condone the delay in filing the expressions of interest. We are willing to do so now. Please fix a time limit within which we can file the resolution plan. We will take it up. Which begs the question, for the times that the number of times, in some cases, the 3 or 4 or 5 times that the expressions of interest are published when there is time to do so. But they don't explain why it was not brought to my notice. That is a stock answer we get from the prospective resolution applicants, because at that stage, they're still the prospective resolution applicants. The stock answer we get is, we were not informed. Now, is it really humanly feasible to have an advertisement published in every district in the country? It is not possible. You should somehow make an effort. The IBBA has a wonderful website. They update it almost on a daily basis. I myself regularly read the updates there. Every single day I check up the updates. And if you're subscribed to the mailing list, then they send you the updates every day, that there are new updates to the IBBI website. Please go read it. Everything is given there, but we don't bother doing it. Sometimes at the stage of finalization of the resolution plan, we get an application from some of the statutory authorities saying, if you don't condone this delay, then public interest will suffer. Again, we are forced to take a stand as to how the public interest will suffer. If we go too strict on that, then they said nothing is getting done from this adjudicating authority. If we are too lenient, then the whole process again goes for a toss. It is this delicate balance that we have to maintain as adjudicating authority. It is this delicate balance that we are forced to maintain. And therefore, when it comes to timelines, my request is, please try and get it completed within the 330-day period. That is the norm. That is not the exception. There was one matter where the insolvency professional told the bench that he is still the IRP after about 10 months. We asked him why. Why was he not confirmed? He said, no, COC has not confirmed me, so I don't know what to do. Are these the kind of submissions that you make to the adjudicating authority? Now, because he is RP, he says, I am not bound by the provisions relating to the RP. I will only carry out the duties of the IRP. Now, COC has not bothered confirming him. He has not bothered asking the COC why confirmation is not taking place. You're supposed to do it at the first meeting. Why was it not done? No idea. Now we have this aspect of this 19.2. At what stage do you file it? Do you file it too early? Do you file it too late? These questions are there. Now take one particular case. I don't want to name it. The information memorandum was prepared. The RFRP is invited. Resolution plan submitted for consideration. COC approves the resolution plan. Thereafter, along with the application for approval of the resolution plan, we get a section 19.2 saying the promoters have not cooperated. So what view do we take of these things? How do you even pass an order on the section 19.2? So we asked him, how did you prepare the information memorandum? On what basis, if there was no cooperation whatsoever? No, we received some cooperation, but we didn't receive everything. Is it okay? How many times have you written to them? How many times have you asked them? Have you asked them to visit you? None of these things was there. But why this was? Because tomorrow IBBI should not ask them, when you didn't receive this, why didn't you file a 19.2? Therefore, this checkbox approach. Yes, I have filed a 19.2, adjudicating authority has not taken a view. Now, I say this with a great deal of responsibility. There is any resolution of a corporate debtor, whatever may be the size of the corporate debtor, howsoever competent the resolution professional may be, it cannot be achieved by sitting in the air-conditioned comforts of drawing rooms. You will have to go out. You will have to get your hands soiled. You will have to do the hard running. Only then will it take place. Wherever the RP has got his hands soiled, we have seen that a resolution is achieved within the timelines. And in the applications which are filed, in those cases, we see they detail out whatever steps they have taken, how much of effort has gone in. We see it from the applications. We don't even need to exercise too much of a mind on it, whether to allow or not to allow. We want to allow such applications because he has done the hard running. Now, when the time comes for realizing the fruits thereof, he is now finding that there is the time pressure of the 330-day period. In those cases, we'll happily extend it. But then that effort has to be there from the RP. In most cases, it is routine. That shouldn't happen. As seasoned professionals, you shouldn't allow that to happen. Now, the second aspect is on the avoidance transactions. I think much has been said about the Kolkata bench's decisions in Suraj Fabrics. That was in February 2021, where we held that if you don't comply with 35A, the regulation 35A of the CARP regulations, then the application should not really be considered. Now, it received a lot of publicity. Now, whether the publicity is good or bad, you would be in a better position to know. But we have held after the Suraj Fabrics case, in a long line of cases, that the RPs have not followed the timelines prescribed in regulation 35A. Now, 35A requires two critical aspects. One is on the timelines, and the second is on what is required to be done. On the timeline, before the 75th day, you're supposed to form an opinion. I'm sorry to say this. Many of the resolution professionals don't know the difference between opinion and determination. I have to make this a thing. I say it with, again, with a deep sense of regret. The opinion is the preliminary one. That is not required to be communicated to the IBBI. They have not said so anywhere in the regulations. And yet we are routinely told in the courts, both in Kolkata as well as in Cuttack now, and earlier in Bombay, that yes, I have intimated to the IBBI. About what? About the opinion. When? Before the transactional auditor's report came in. Where is it stated in the regulations that you have to intimate to the IBBI about the opinion formed by you? It is not said anywhere. On the other hand, what is required is when you form a determination on the basis of the transactional auditor's report, you have now determined that these are preferential in nature in some way or the other. Then you intimate to the IBBI and file an application with the adjudicating authority. And in a couple of cases, when we asked them why it was so late, he said COC didn't approve. What is the role of the COC as far as transactional auditors are concerned, other than appointing them and approving the remuneration? The role is for the resolution professional to perform. The determination is an independent determination. He is not bound by the transactional auditor's report. He may or may not accept. And you have to explain in respect of each transaction identified why you consider it to be preferential, why you consider it to be undervalued, why you consider it to be extortionate, or why you consider it to be fraudulent. A one-liner is not the answer. On the basis of the reports received from the transactional auditor, the RP considers that these are all preferential in nature and fraudulent in nature. Fraudulent transactions are something that you have to see very carefully. It is not a word that is used lightly. And in many cases we have seen, Section 66 is being invoked as a matter of routine, just to avoid the look-back period in 43, 47, and 50. How do you do this? When you plead something is fraudulent, you have to, because that is with the criminal intent. The proceedings are quasi-criminal in nature. Because a finding of preferential, undervalued, extortionate, or fraudulent transaction has wide-ranging ramifications which go beyond the life of the corporate debtor here. They may be promoters in 101 other companies. There may be directors there. Have you ever considered the ripple effect of a finding here on the other aspects, on the other directorships that he holds? He becomes ineligible to submit any other plans. There are so many other ways in which he is adversely affected. Therefore, my request to you is, please don't routinely invoke Section 66. Because if you do, and if it is before a bench in which I am a part of, you will have to explain how it is fraudulent. And that will not be on the basis of conjecture. It cannot be done on that basis. This is something that has to be inculcated. And 39.2 also requires you to place all these PUFE transactions before the COC at the time that the resolution plans are being considered by them. You have to give them details. But we find it is a routine thing. Yes, we have filed it with the adjudicating authority. They don't tell the COC on what date they identified, what date they filed it with the COC. Sorry, with the adjudicating authority for approval. In many cases, in many cases, the pleadings would not be complete by the time the resolution plan comes up. Now, if we take up the resolution plan for approval nowadays, because of the Venus Recruiter's judgment, there is a one-liner in the resolution plans saying, in case of any preferential, undervalued, extortionate, or fraudulent transactions, if there are any monies recovered, then they will accrue either to the creditors or to the corporate debtor. Was that the theme of the Venus Recruiter's judgment? And all because of one line in para 92 of the judgment, the SEC version, or SEC online version, para 92. All because of that one line. They miss out on para 89, miss out on para 91, miss out on para 95, which says the resolution professional or the liquid, in the case of resolution plans, the resolution professional becomes functus officio. He cannot pursue these applications afterwards. And the corporate debtor, under its new avatar, or the resolution applicant, or the committee of creditors can't step into the role. That was never the intention. Why did we have these strict timelines? The opinion on the 75th day, the determination by the 115th, the filing with the adjudicating authority by the 135th day, now extended by the 14th of July amendment to 140th day. They were with some purpose. If you should keep the overall architecture in mind of the IBC. It is supposed to be completed in 330. If these aspects are not out of the way, where will you get a resolution plan from? It is possible in some cases it may be kept pending. We are not saying as adjudicating authority, we are completely blameless. There are blemishes where adjudicating authorities have routinely ignored these when a resolution plan comes and approved the resolution plan, leaving the preferential transactions to be considered at a later date. But that should not be the norm. What you should do is to try and finish off these matters by the timeline specified. Now, whether it is in a case extendable or not will depend on the facts of those cases. But we had an application before us where the person has asked for exclusion of time from the date of commencement of the CARP, which is about 8 months now, on the ground that he is unable to do anything because the promoters have not given him any papers. And mind you, there is no Section 19 pending in that case. He says he requires time to form the opinion under Section 43 and other avoidable transaction sections. And he has not received papers, therefore exclude the entire period from the CARP. Now, do we wait indefinitely for him to get papers into his drawing room? How do we even order this application? What kind of orders do we pass here? And what happens to the Satish Kumar judgment? If he doesn't receive papers for 1 year, will he say, please exclude everything now? Questions that keep occurring every time we get these applications. These are questions that we ask ourselves. If we stretch this scenario to 1 year, 2 years later, the promoters have not been cooperating. Will he keep quiet? Are his hands really tied? They're not. You have to take appropriate steps there. That is not done. In one case, we had the avoidable transactions applications and the resolution plan application filed more or less together. You can see that from the numbers, the IA numbers, more or less together. There was nothing in the resolution plan. So we asked the resolution applicant, would you like to, resolution professional, would you like to withdraw this? He says, no. Why? Because the IBBI will be after me. So the interest of the corporate debtor is not kept in mind at all. It is self-preservation. Then that becomes subservient to the interest of everything else. Corporate debtor's interest is not kept in mind. My own self-preservation. If that is the case, then activities should have been performed in accordance with the timelines. There is a form given, there is a checklist given. In terms of that, we don't perform it. So how do we go about doing it? How do we even justify this? And then we come to the next aspect, which is the resolution plan itself. Can you imagine a resolution plan where 3 individuals join together and submit this plan, and they want exemption to be granted by the adjudicating authority from the SEBI takeover code? Which means that there is a standard resolution plan and you only fill the names of the resolution applicants. It is not really tailored to meet the demands of the corporate debtor. In another matter we saw, it is a manufacturing industry. Exemptions sought include immunity from prosecutions under the Factories Act, the Fire Safety Act, the Environmental Protection Act, the Water Pollution Act, every conceivable act. So what happens if a fire breaks out in the factory? Who will be responsible? Will you hold some clerk in the corporate debtor responsible for this? How does the resolution professional even commend this plan for the approval of the COC? Now we are talking about collective thing. The COC has also seen it. The resolution professional has seen it. If he had read it even once, would he have even commended this to the COC for approval? It is not enough just to see Section 29A. We don't see how an establishment can be granted immunity under all applicable laws. One can understand for past actions, you're seeking immunity. That even that you don't need to ask, because 32A comes in. What is given by law can't be taken away by the adjudicating authority in any case. That is already there. But in this case, what they were asking for is complete immunity. How long? One doesn't know. It's forever if you don't practically give the time frames. Let me assure you all, at least when I receive a resolution plan, I go through it. It is not the case that if it is a 300-page resolution plan, we will not go through it. We don't have the time. Even if we don't have the time, we will go through it. People who have appeared in Kolkata bench know how it is treated. Waivers are treated separately. Now, 49, 50 waivers are sought for. In one matter, it was 89 waivers, most of which is either granted by the court or cannot be granted by the adjudicating authority. And this fundamental premise that this is a single window clearance scheme. Yes, it is a single window clearance scheme, which means all internal approvals that you require under the Companies Act, let us say for reduction of capital or extinguishment of the existing share capital, so that you can bring in new capital. The existing promoter's stake is reduced to 0. That you can do under a resolution plan. But does that exempt you from filing your forms with the ROC or filing it along with the applicable fee? How does that happen? How do external compliances be given a go by? How can it be done? Stamp duty exemption. That is a matter for the state government to consider. How does the adjudicating authority sitting here under a central law exempt you from payment of stamp duty to a state government authority? And that too for an action that is going to be performed in the future. It is not past dues. It is in the future. You are going to ask for mutation of name. Please ask them not to charge any fee. How does that happen? These are all matters that have to be kept in mind. What you ask for, you can't ask for the moon. Neither can the adjudicating authority grant you that. If these aspects are considered, then the delay on the part of the adjudicating authority, because we have to pass orders in respect of each of these waivers. There are two approaches that the adjudicating authorities in general adopt. Number one, reject everything. Number two, don't go into it, approve the resolution plan as a whole, because ultimately it is the COC's headache. But then we found a plan where for the next 10 years, the person concerned is not required to pay any earnest money deposit to the railway authorities for contracts. How do we grant this exemption? Your resolution plan, first and foremost, under 30 subsection 2, has to be compliant with all existing laws. That basic check has not been done in the plan itself. It has gone for a toss. I have received a resolution plan. I'm giving it to COC. COC has approved it. I'm passing it to the adjudicating authority. Now, all of you take a view on what is required to be done. So what is the role of the resolution professional then? At the first stage filtering, these resolution plans ought to have been filtered out. They should have been told to modify it. But it can't be your case that the consultants, now I understand consultants are appointed for preparing resolution plans. It can't be that the consultants will ask for everything and you'll simply say, okay. We need to know what are the conditions precedent. That if it is not allowed, you're not going ahead with the resolution plan. We need to know that. There was a recent resolution plan where we found, since this is based on the information memorandum, and we have not had time to do a due diligence in respect of the property, the landed property of the corporate debtor, tomorrow, if there is any problem with reference to the title of the corporate debtor, then the resolution applicant should be permitted to withdraw, and even the EMD should be handed over back to him without a single deduction. Now, did we prevent you from doing your routine due diligence? Will you not see the survey number on which the land is situated? Go to the registrar of assurances, take out the encumbrance certificate, see if there is an encumbrance, see if there is a title, take out certified copies of the documents. How do you put this as part of the plan and expect it to be approved by the resolution, by the adjudicating authority? So I had to tell the resolution professional, you have not read the plan at all. Of course, it wasn't said in open court. Because if it had been, it would not be in this form at all now. This is an aspect I don't know why resolution professionals don't want to engage in. That should have been your crowning glory, getting a resolution plan piloted, and one which stands the test of judicial scrutiny. But this doesn't. If you have exemptions like this being called for. Routine question, you would have seen it in probably hundreds of resolution plans passed by various adjudicating authorities. We can't ask the income tax authorities to direct that the benefit of these carry forward of losses be given. We don't direct that at all. And yet it is put in, hoping against hope that one day the adjudicating authority may sanction it so that we can quote it as precedent elsewhere. One miss on the part of, we sometimes feel we are like the security agencies. You can afford to fail 99 times out of 100, but we have to be sure 100% of the time. You don't know the stress we undertake when we look at the resolution plan. Sometimes you have this thin edge of the wedge. The corporate data will be exempted, fine. Then they say the promoters of the corporate data will also be exempted. That will be there in fine print in a huge paragraph. Now, if you don't read it fully, and if you say yes, then thank you. This resolution plan will be quoted in 101 places, waived in before various authorities saying we have been exempted. They'll have no knowledge about it at all. Now, what is within the personal knowledge, or for which the promoters are personally culpable? How do you create a route of waiver through a resolution plan for this? Let us say under the PMLA. The directors are individually responsible. Now, can you waive the resolution plan before the PMLA authorities and say, thank you very much? We are completely exempted. Drop all proceedings. It doesn't happen. There may be some cases where there are genuine difficulties. One can understand that. But these are not matters where there are genuine difficulties. If you see it, if you read it once, you will understand there is this problem. It has to be filtered out. It doesn't happen. Now, if there are any questions, I'll take them, because these are my general observations that in terms of the resolution process that I have seen, which I can consider to be critical in nature.
Lordship. Much obliged, Lordship. Thank you so much for this. Lordship, there are a few queries which is coming in and some hands have also been raised. But Lordship, 2-3 queries which is making the rounds is, one is section 32A. Everybody is grappling that though there is a specific mention in not only the court, but even the Supreme Court has upheld it so many number of times, especially in the SR matter. But even then, Lordship, we find that this section is it's just put to test all the time. So Lordship, PMLA, and we also don't see too many orders coming in from the various benches of NCLT, is in our, at least our observation could be wrong, but that doesn't come in very quickly, because if the ED comes in or any other authority like that comes in, a lot of priority is given to them, though section 32A is quite complete and quite clear in that sense, not only in CIRP, but also in liquidation process, Lordship. And therefore, we find that value maximization is quite a far-fetched idea. We don't even get any value at all. So, my lords, what has been your view by and large on this section 32A?
No, section 32A, there is absolutely no, at least in my mind, there is complete clarity on what section 32A entails. It does not entail exemption as far as the individual acts of directors or the other key managerial personnel are concerned. But it definitely exempts the corporate data under the new management from the effects of whatever actions have been performed by the earlier management. That is the sum and substance of it. That is the that is the underlying theme of Section 32A. Where is the difficulty that is arising in this case? I don't understand that.
Lordship, actually, we don't get too many favorable or quick orders on 32A. We keep, there's a lot of...
No, 32A, no applications can be filed. This is as part of the resolution plan. And in the resolution plan, at least insofar as the orders passed by me are concerned, in whichever bench I have been, I have made it a point to draw attention to Section 32A aspects and what is granted in terms of Section 32A. That's all I can say. I can't speak for other adjudicating authorities.
Thank you.
But I think what Madam Binani wants to say is that value maximization doesn't happen because the properties are attached. So there is no resolution applicant forthcoming, or there is no buyer for in the process of liquidation. So maybe the 32A ambit probably should have been a bit more enlarged, where this kind of exemption should have been given during the resolution process stage also, so that to attract resolution applicants.
I think by now, considering that we are all professionals of some standing, one would understand that until a matter is authoritatively pronounced by the Supreme Court, we don't accept it at all as law. In 32A, let us hope one of my orders in respect of these exemptions that have been granted get challenged and it reaches the Supreme Court, which will lay down this thing.
Lordship.
My lord, this Gujarat Urja matter.
That is also one. That's also how it should be, because the rule of law, it is not just until you challenge it, you don't know the limits of that law. Only when you challenge it, it happens. Isn't it?
Yes,
now, the adjudicating authority's order by itself is not final. There is the NCLAT, there is the Supreme Court. So in any given case, until that happens, it will continue like this.
Yes, my lord. My lord, there's another query which is coming in on the Gujarat Urja judgment.
I'm sorry, I'm going back again to 32A. In one case, we removed the attachments and the Enforcement Directorate went to the High Court, which has granted a stay. Yes, please, Gujarat Urja.
My lords, in Gujarat Urja matter, there's a lot of, we always approach, my lords, in section 60, subsection 5. After this Gujarat Urja matter, it's quite clear that if there is a private law under which there has been some issues with the contractual stuff also, that can be approachable to the adjudicating authority. So my lords, there is still some confusion around the fact that which one, like for example, Provident Fund, trademark, these are the very pressing issues which daunts or haunts the resolution professional in its lifetime of CIRP or liquidation. So my lord's views would be quite welcome in this regard.
As far as Provident Fund is concerned, one must understand why the Honorable NCLAT also said it is not part of the, it cannot form part of the estate of the corporate debtor. It is something that is collected from the employees, and then the employer makes a matching contribution and remits it to the authority concerned. It is not an asset of the corporate debtor. It never was and it never will be. And therefore, there is an exemption as far as the Provident Fund dues are concerned, which is rightly so also. Not only is it a beneficial piece of social legislation, it is also for this purpose, because the asset that the money that you collect from your employees is not yours. That is why when you don't remit it to the Provident Fund authorities, they invoke both 120B as well as 420 of the IPC when it involves non-remittance of Provident Fund dues. This is the reason. So how should you treat it as part of the thing? It is not a statutory due in that sense. How is it a statutory due? The statutory authority is collecting it, but it was never a statutory due. It is not meant for service. That is why.
Yes, my lords.
And the second aspect of your thing, between private law and public law, we find, at least in my time at the bench, that in most cases, the 60 subsection 5 provision is misused. For everything under the sun, the resolution professional approaches the adjudicating authority. We are not a one-stop solution. There are matters which have to be adjudicated by the civil court, where you have to go and file a case in the civil court. You can't approach the adjudicating authority for everything, which is that important distinction in embassy matter by the Honorable Supreme Court. Made that distinction. In cases where you have to approach other authorities, you have to do that.
My lords, what would be one or two examples of such cases?
Take this case of, let us say, exemption from payment of stamp duty itself. Take that case. There is something which says, even if it is under the new management, let us say you have a 10% stamp duty on it. We're just taking an example. Now you find that is unconscionable. Can you approach the adjudicating authority for removing it, or for asking for exemption? Where there is a definite policy laid down by the central or state government, you can't ask us to exempt you from that policy. From that policy, if a law flows, you can't ask for exemption from that law. Once the dues have been crystallized, past dues, the income tax authorities also, they can't recover it from the new management. That is clear. But you carry forward of losses is for the future. That is not something that the adjudicating authority will decide. That if it is available under the income tax law, we can ask them to do. There was an interesting case where we found they wanted the corporate data under the new management to be treated as a new enterprise as far as Bangla Shri is concerned. I think there's some scheme of the state government where this thing is involved. And there we granted that exemption. Because the idea is that there will be a fresh start for the corporate data. We granted that exemption. These things we can grant. But if you're asking for say, just give me a moment, please. Am I audible?
Yes, Lordship. Yes, Lordship.
I suddenly was hearing my own echo. Yes. So in those matters where you're asking for an exemption from policy, on what basis are you asking for that policy? You have to convince the state government. If it arises out of arising only out of the fact that the corporate data is now under new management, they will also favorably consider. So in most of the resolution plans that I have at least approved, I have written there that the authorities concerned shall consider based on the overarching IBC architecture.
Yes, Lordship. Lordship, we are getting questions on this moratorium blatant violation of Section 14. Lordship has any specific things to mention to us, Lordship, regarding Section 14? Any advice which my lords may have?
If the banks are available, they may not take it very kindly. Banks are represented today.
No, Lordship, it's not the question of banks or the RPs.
I'll tell you why.
Read your mind, Lordship.
I'll tell you why. The CARP commencement date is there. From that point on, everybody knows that you can't really, it's not just the banks, we can also include the other authorities in this. You can't really have a lien marked on the account, especially in a case where the authority concerned has filed its claim with the resolution professional. They should proactively take steps to have it removed. They don't do that. Now it comes to us in the following the principle of Audi Alteram Partem, we gave them notice to appear. They appear in the notice itself in order to cut short the time, at least wherever I am sitting, I ensure that it is there, that upon receipt of the notice, they shall take steps to remove this lien or the freeze of the account. They don't do that. They don't appear on the day marked for hearing. We grant them one more opportunity. They appear on that day and say, give us time to file a counter now. And what do we find routinely in the counter? We find that dues of such and such nature have not been paid by the corporate data, as a result of which the authority concerned in exercise of the powers conferred on them by that particular statute have passed this order of fleeing. Now, IBC ki to dhajjiyan uda di na fir. What is his overriding provision of the act in case of inconsistency? Now, after we receive this counter, we schedule it for arguments, by which time 5-6 months is lost. This is what happens. These frivolous litigations can be avoided if everyone did their job properly. If the statutory authorities, upon receipt of the notice, and the RPs also, when they see from the books that income tax will be routinely involved, income tax, GST, if it is a manufacturing company, GST will be certainly involved. Why don't they just inform them? Here is this thing. If you have marked any lien, please remove them. Bankers don't obey. Let us get a court notice, then we will see. How do we do in these circumstances? Unless there is a final ruling from the Supreme Court, which says if we don't do it within this time, then face the consequences, then nothing will happen. That is the ground reality.
Yes, my lords. My lords, we'll have one or two, if you permit, my lords, one or two participants who would like to mention their question to you directly. May I do so, my lords?
Please.
Thank you, my lords. Mr. Toti, you have been raising your hand for quite a long time. If you would like to just unmute yourself.
You must send him some balm also to apply on his arm.
Oh my God. Mr. Jayashankar Toti, would you like to, if you're there, if you can hear me? Okay. By the time Mr. Toti comes on the screen.
Somebody else also raised their hands. JMVD Legal.
Yes, okay.
Though he now doesn't want to answer.
My lord's observation power, no one can match. So yes, Mr. JMVD Legal, if you're there. Yes, you're there. So I'll just unmute you. Yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Sir, I would request you your views on the time limit of 90 days for filing the claims before CRP. So before the JP Kensington judgment, we had the NCLT principal bench declaring that it is a directory provision, but now it is a 90 days mandatory. The most affected I see is the tax authorities, because though they are allowed to pass an assessment order during the CRP process, they can't file a claim because usually the government process leads after 90 days and they complete the assessment after 90 days. And once they file, their claim is rejected due to time limitation.
I thought all proceedings were stayed because of the Section 14 moratorium that kicked in the day the insolvency, the petition was admitted.
Sir, so as your lordship rightly pointed out, we had certain findings which the councils and the department used to pass the assessment orders, wherein certain NCLTs have allowed that the assessment can be done because it is merely crystallization of debt.
You see, then read the provision of Section 14. See what it says.
Yes, sir.
No proceedings shall be continued pending, whatever, it can't even be continued. There is a difference in the moratorium between Section 14 and Section 33, subsection 5.
Indeed.
There is one crucial word missing in Section 33, subsection 5, if you see it. And therefore, we can't say, I can't speak for all NCLTs, but at least this is my view, that you can't proceed with the adjudication also. If you can proceed with the adjudication in a tax matter, why can't you proceed with arbitration then? That is also crystallization of claims. Why can't the civil courts proceed with the adjudication? That is also crystallization of claims. Isn't it?
Indeed, sir, indeed.
And Lordship, exactly from that school of thought, as an RP in the CRP process, we are not able to intimate each of the departments separately, because if we do it for one, why is it that we don't do it for the others? So though in liquidation process, in some separate laws, Lordship, like in GST and income tax, there are some provisions where we have to intimate it to the departments concerned during liquidation, but not in CIRP. So that is what holds us back sometimes, Lordship.
But Madam, it's, let's see this case. Since most of your chartered accountants, the answers can come from the audience in this case. Are the dues payable to statutory authorities mentioned in the financial statements or not?
Indeed, sir.
They are. If that is the case, what prevents the resolution professionals from writing a letter saying, here is the claim as per the books of accounts? Now, if you want it to be considered, please file your claims in the appropriate form. What prevents you? Especially, see, the registered office of the company is in the state of West Bengal. There is a unit in, let us say, Karnataka. Tax is payable on that particular thing. But because your public announcements have taken place in the state of West Bengal, they were not aware of it at all.
Lordship.
What prevents you from intimating to them if there is a due as per the books?
So,
nothing.
I know there are a lot of questions. Lordship is asking to the entire.
See, adjudicating authorities delay, one can understand. We don't have a choice. Whatever applications you file, we have to take it on board and adjudicate. As far as the resolution professionals are concerned, you're supposed to intimate how many matters you have at hand. Correct? Don't take off more than what you don't take more than what you can chew. If I am RP in 10 different places and then I say I don't have time to do these things, is it fair? Adjudicating authority can't prevent the filing of an application because we have 1,000 matters pending. Please don't file it until we dispose it of. We can't say that. But as RPs, you need not take new assignments until you finish this.
So my lords has taken us to the new notification that has come. I would like to mention it for the benefit of our fraternity who's joining in the program. There is a notification which has come yesterday from IBBI dated 22/7/2021, which says that Lordship may also have read that you can have 10 assignments as an RP in CIRP process, out of which three can have the maximum admitted claims of 1,000 crore. So that's the notification which has come yesterday. You may like to look at it. And through that notification, there are some changes which has happened in Rule 5 of the Insolvency Professionals Rules, which you may see it at your leisure. But this is quite an important change that the IBBI has brought in with the number of limit that it has created. Lordship, we have our views about what you mentioned, but some other time, Lordship. May I now request Anup Singh Paliwal, who has also raised his hand, but he's raised it so very recently that I don't need a balm for him. So, Mr. Paliwal, I have unmuted yourself.
Lordship, thank you, ma'am. Your Lordship, the relief that is available to a successful resolution applicant under Section 32A, is it also available to a successful bidder when we sell the corporate debtor as a going concern and liquidation? Though it is slightly off the agenda, but I'm keen to hear you on this, Your Lordship.
Look at if you look at the Act as a whole, you will know. 32A, does it even apply to a liquidation process?
No, Your Lordship.
Then?
Your Lordship, but when we sell it as
I am very clear in my mind.
Yes, sir.
I am like the cricket umpire to whom a set of rules have been given. We can't decide on either the correctness of the rule or indeed its fairness or go beyond what the rule says, applying the spirit of equity into it. We can't do that. For example, to take a cricket analogy, Mankading is not in the spirit of cricket, but it is a legally available route to get a batsman out. The bowler is not obliged to give him a warning. If he gives him, he is complying with the spirit of cricket. That is a nebulous concept. Like that, whether this should not be applicable or not, yes, one could argue it should be applicable. But right now, is it? It is not. It is as simple as that. You may say that it should be treated as if it is a resolution.
Yes, sir.
That is a different thing altogether. That you should pressurize Parliament to make a provision for it. The rule given by Parliament is what we are supposed to implement. We can't stretch it. Isn't it? We have to play within those four corners. I may have a different view, but I can't bring it into my judgment while sitting on the bench. Yes.
Your Lordship, there is a serious, while one of my cases pending at NCLAT in the same matter, on these lines only, Your Lordship.
I don't think we should discuss individual cases.
Yes.
That will not be correct.
Okay, Your Lordship.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Anupji. Sir, there is a reeling pressure on all of us to understand that whether contempt proceedings is available to us when any order of your Lordship is not followed. Because
this is such a sensitive thing. I have my own views on it. I don't want to say it here. I'm deliberately avoiding that question.
Okay, okay, my lords, we respect that. My lords, can FIR be filed once, say for example, my lords has issued an order about 19.2, specifically asking on 19.2. So can, if you don't get that support from those suspended board of directors from a particular person, can an FIR be lodged or something like that, my lords?
Are FIRs available for violation of court orders? Or do you bring it to the attention of the court concerned?
I don't think so they are available. I have my own views. I don't think that is available, but there has been a persistent question on that. So my lords, I thought it.
I saw it on the chat box also.
Yes, my lords.
I saw it on the chat box also.
My lords is a very fast reader. So yes, my lords, that is how it is. It has come to you. So my lords would like to say anything, or should we skip and go to the next question?
No, if I have asked them to introspect a bit. If I violate a Supreme Court's order, can I file an FIR against that person for violation of the Supreme Court's order? The court can do what it wants, but can the person aggrieved file an FIR for this? Will the police say, please go and implement the order? And that too on the basis of a complainant's thing. Can it be done?
My lords, now, yes, my lords, you're pretty right. And now, instead of questions, my lords, lot of accolades are flowing in from all corners. My lords, we are reaching 1 o'clock. I know your time is also precious, and we had only blocked your time up to 1 o'clock. You've been very kind enough to be there with us. So just after 2 minutes, I'll give the baton to the Secretary of NCLT Kolkata Bar Association, Mr. Arun Gupta, for doing the vote of thanks. But one more, yes.
Before that, I just noticed Mr. Philip Matthew. His comment is, if other authorities can put roadblocks in the implementation of the resolution plan approved by the adjudicating authority, then the whole object of revival of the corporate data will be lost, which is true. But then the rule of law entails that you give a free flow for the rule of law to prevail. And therefore, if they feel they are aggrieved by an order of the adjudicating authority and they have to take recourse to the High Court, one can't prevent them from going to the High Court. One can always rail against the time taken in disposing of matters. But if you prevent them from going to the High Court, it won't be proper. One can't really do that, not in a rule of law society.
My lords, there's one question that somebody's persistently asking me on the WhatsApp, that would you kindly ask my lords that is there a judicial decorum where one NCLT is bound to follow the orders of another NCLT on the same issue?
Actually, it is not in that sense. There's a judicial decorum which is laid down by the Supreme Court downwards, that if a bench wants to differ, usually you follow the orders, the previous orders of the coordinate bench. But if there is something you want to differ with, then you have to refer it to the third member, to the president, who will constitute a bench for determination of the questions involved. That is how it is required to be done. But then, personally speaking, there is another view to it. If you don't differ, there is no question of law involved at all.
Yes.
Because then the same thing follows. A wrong view taken at some point of time will continue to be followed. One can't say that every adjudicating authority in whatever orders it follows has really factored in everything and arrived at the right conclusion.
Yes,
one can't say it. One must accept one's policies also. Today, I may pass an order without really noticing a previous judgment which has a bearing on the matter. Then can you say it is binding? These questions arise. They will really have to go, that will depend on the facts of each case.
We can understand
There are
that.
mixed questions involved.
Right. Mr. Madan, welcome to the program. I'm sorry, that's a late welcome. Pardon me for that. Mr. Shovik Roy and Mr. Ashwin Matthew, if your questions have already been handled, would you like to still ask any query, or else we will like to go towards the closure of the program? Okay. I must unmute for you to say. Mr. Ashwin, I've unmuted yourself.
You held the power in your hands and asked him to speak.
I'm sorry. Mr. Shovik Roy, I've also unmuted yourself.
No, ma'am, my question has not yet been answered. If I may have the liberty to put it to your Lordship.
Yes, please do. We can quickly do that.
Lordship, I'm putting the liberty of taking the liberty of putting this question to you on this issue in view of conflicting judgments which I've read on the threshold limit notification of 24/3/2020, whether it is retrospective or prospective. And if prospective, then it would apply to which event for determining the cutoff date? The date of the default arising, the date of giving a dispute notice, or the date of filing the application?
One part of your question also has ramifications in several other matters. Therefore, I'll clarify that. And that is whether the issue of a notice itself gives rise to a cause of action. I don't hold this view that if you issue a notice, then by itself, the cause of action, the chain of events is set in motion by that. Because if you give me a notice and I owe you dues, and I just want to avoid this proceeding, I can pay you off in 10 days. I can, then there is no question of, you're initiating a CARP against me. So this aspect of notice by itself being a cause of action should not be there. Take the case of 138. There's a check that is given to you, it is bounced. Now you have 1 month within which you give him a notice to make good the check amount. If he does so, then does a 138 proceeding lie against him? It won't. Similar should be the case as far as demand notice under IBC is concerned. By itself, it is nothing. You are putting him on notice. If he satisfies your demand or brings it to your attention that I have already paid it off, or he points out a dispute redressal mechanism, there are only 3 possibilities, or he doesn't reply. These are the only 4 possibilities. Now, by that by itself, let us say within the 3-year period, you give him this notice. That by itself doesn't extend your thing. Nor do I hold the view that you have filed your application within that period. So let's forget that aspect of it. So what was the other aspect that you raised?
No, the other aspect.
The default. The default.
Default.
See, what was the intention of the 24/3/2020 notification? Let's see facts in perspective, because sometimes when you get too bogged down in details, you fail to see the wood for the trees in general. Now, what was the need to bring in that amendment? Why did they raise it? You must understand that the NCLTs were not fully functional then. They were asked to hear only urgent matters. They didn't want the NCLT to be burdened with filing of applications, number 1. Number 2 is there will be n number of defaults that will come in because of the pandemic. So to hold that if there is a default that has occurred on or after 24/3/2020, that to my mind doesn't commend itself to me. There is a threshold that is limit. No, 1 minute. Let me complete. Yeah. Today, let us say in the civil courts, you see this. The city civil court will have a jurisdiction. The district courts will have a jurisdiction. And the high courts will have a jurisdiction. Because in some high courts, there is this original jurisdiction, like in Madras. The Madras High Court acts as the district court for Madras city within the corporation limits. Now, let us say today you want to file an application, and a notification comes in from the Madras High Court increasing the pecuniary limit of the city civil court to say 2 crores. Can I say, no, this pertains to a previous period, therefore I'll file it in the High Court? It applies to all filings on or after that date. That is my view. It cannot say in respect of events in respect of which a cause of action has arisen for filing after this date, you go to the city civil court. Before that, you come to the High Court. I don't subscribe to this view. It applies to all filings on or after 24/3/2020. Simple as that. The same thing will happen if they reduce the pecuniary limit also. Let us say they bring it back to 50 lakhs. Can you say it is in respect of only those demands in respect of which a cause of action has arisen after the limit has been reduced that we can approach the High Court, you can approach the NCLT? You must look at it both ways. Instead of looking at it from the perspective of one particular litigant, see what the law says, because the law will have to be applied uniformly.
Sir, this is Ashwin Matthew. I hope I can ask a question now.
I hope I have answered the previous question.
No, sir, if I just take the...
Yes, Mr. Matthew, please go ahead. And
yeah, sir, I have 2 questions. I've done a fair amount of work on the IBC. One is, sir, what is your opinion on Section 29A of the IBC, which disqualifies promoters, in light of what happened in the Essar Steel case, where the Ruiyas brought Rosneft to take over a company which they had set up, and the judgment of Mr. Rohinton Nariman, with all due respect, allowed ArcelorMittal to come in as the 2nd largest steel maker. And he said, in a judgment that has been lauded, that he said that an operational creditor who's the backbone of a company can be sent off with a liquidation value of ₹1. So do you have any views on this?
Sitting here as the adjudicating authority, still holding office, do you want me to have any such views?
Sir, you can express...
No, and that too in a public platform?
Can you, on a public platform, sir, you can express a view?
No.
You may not be right or wrong. Are you saying the matter is still sub judice?
I'm not saying the matter is sub judice. I know what is the meaning of sub judice. I'm not saying the matter is sub judice.
I'm also aware that you know what is the meaning of sub judice,
certain things. No, just listen. Let's not get into an argument, Mr. Matthew. Let's not get into an argument.
If we have to get into an argument, we will get into an argument, sir. This is my feeling. And Mr. Rohit,
you're entitled to your feeling. You're entitled to. Nobody is stopping you from having your feeling, Mr. Matthew.
You are sidestepping the issue.
It may be your view. You hold on to your view.
I will hold on to my views.
Please do.
Because it shows corruption.
Nobody is going to prosecute you for this. Please hold on.
Thank you, Lordship.
Please hold on to that view. No issues. Yes.
Thank you, Lordship. May I now request Mr. Gupta? Lordship, we'll move towards closure. We've already held you back for quite a number of minutes beyond the prescribed time. So I now request Mr. Gupta to kindly propose a hearty vote of thanks for my lords, of course, and to also the precious participants who have been there with us throughout. Lordship, we've touched the high of 325 participants, 333 rather. I know number is never so crucial or critical. It's just to show that, my lords, your words of wisdom is reaching far and many. Yes, Arunji.
Popularity, my lord's popularity. My lord's popularity. In fact, I and Mr. D.N. Sharma were thinking of opening up a fan club once your lordship demits office here, not while you're in office.
I don't think I deserve any of that.
But we were just discussing. Thank you, Lordship, for coming and addressing us, and the clarity of thought that you bring to the table, my lord, is exemplary, and that also helps us to formulate our opinions and our understanding of this complex law. So I don't know how many of you have noticed that in the morning his lordship is in Calcutta, which is the city of Goddess Kali, and in the afternoon his lordship is in Cuttack, which is blessed by Lord Jagannath of Puri. So with these divine blessings and the superhuman task that his lordship does so well and with so much elegance and with so much dignity, Lordship, we pray for your good health. And thank you again for coming and addressing us, Lordship. And thank you to all the participants for spending your time and attending the show. Thank you so much. And with your Lordship's permission, we can close the session now.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, my lord.
After my lord's exit, we will exit. So thank you to everyone. We are closing the program. We see you again in another program of ours. Thank you for joining in. Sandeep Kejriwal ji, thank you for being there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamta, for very nicely conducting. Thank you, Mamta.
My pleasure.
For very nicely conducting the program.
My pleasure.
Very nicely conducting, very nicely moderating the program.
Okay. Let's disperse. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now we can exit.
Yes, Gupta.
Okay.